Again, this is the How to Get Published workshop, which is the penultimate workshop of the year in the MA Academic and Professional Development series. And today we are joined by Rebecca Feinberg. And Rebecca is the academic coordinator for the MA program in Global Thought, which means she is the director of that program. And then Matt Hart is an associate professor in the English department and also the director of that, the MA program in English and Comparative Literature. Both of them have all kinds of experience as editors and writers, so they have a lot of great things to share with you today about how to get published. And with that, I will turn it over to you, Rebecca.
Thank you, Rachel. So hello, everyone. Good morning. Thanks for joining us. So as Rachel explained, I direct the MA program in Global Thought, and I've also worked for 8 years as a managing editor, who is the person that you actually interface with when you submit work for a publication to a scholarly journal or when you review others' work. I worked for 2 different journals. One was Environment and Society with Bergen Books, and the other one was Gastronomica with UC Press. And so I wanted to talk to you today both about my experience as a published author, but also seeing things from the other side, from the inside, if you will, because that experience made it far less intimidating for me to publish. And I wanted to clarify kind of how things work and to set realistic expectations for that process. So I'll be talking first about publishing in scholarly journals, and then we'll be turning it over to Matt, who will be covering publishing in other places. So, popular media, ParaAcademic, more of a general audience venue. So to begin, let me just share my screen here. So to begin with, I think really the first question to start with when you're thinking about getting published is, why do you want to do this in the first place, right? Is it to share your work with a specific audience to whom it matters? Is it to enter into dialogue with other experts or stakeholders in your particular field? Are you interested in staking a claim in a particular idea or analytical approach? Or is this really just to add a line, to your CV to strengthen your application for other pursuits? So depending on what your goals are, that's really going to help you figure out where to submit your work and how to prepare it for publication. As those goals are overlapping, but they're not identical, and they're going to push you in different directions. So once you're clear on why you want to publish, that will help you figure out what it is you'd like to publish, right? Which pieces of your work are most promising for those ends, and what contribution or approach do they have to offer? Because the core thing I think to remember with academic publishing and publishing of all kinds is it's not just the topic, but really the core ideas that your work generates or pushes in a new direction that's going to be of interest to editors. So then when you have a piece that you are confident you want to move forward with, the next step is finding the right fit. So for an MA student, some of the big name journals in your field may be a bit of a moonshot at this stage because they require a depth of experience and expertise that is very difficult to acquire in just a year or two. So instead, if you're doing the academic route, I would really encourage you to look for maybe perhaps less famous or smaller, but more focused publications. Journals that specialize in an area or a field or a topic, because there is where you'll have a much better chance of getting published. Your work will be sent to expert reviewers who are more likely to be familiar with the field that you're writing about. And if you are published, it will be to an audience who is more likely to be interested in your work because it's already specialized. So that's where I really encourage you to consult with your advisor, with your instructors, or with CU librarians who are experts in this field to help you identify good candidates. This also includes doing a lot of reading, right? Which journals are publishing the kind of work that you're excited about, that you want to be in conversation with, and that seems most accessible. So come up with a list of potential places to publish and make that numbered, right? In terms of, first choice, second choice, and so forth. And at this point, you may also realize that you'd actually be happier publishing outside of academic journals, or in spaces that are read by a wider audience. So we'll do academic publishing first, and then go into the wider world of more public scholarship. So next step is preparing your work. And I think the most important thing to remember is that you should not ever submit your term paper or your thesis or whatever it is you have written for class as is. Don't do it, because it's very obvious when that happens and you will not get published. So instead, you've really got your work cut out for you at this point, once you've identified which journal it is you're aiming for. You'll want to read a lot of things that have been published in that journal to look for patterns, right? What's the format? What's the style of the pieces that appear in that publication? So paying attention to, how do those articles start off, right? When does the argument come in? How much signposting is the author doing in terms of identifying the specific bodies of work or ideas that they're in conversation with? Is there a set apart lit review? Is there like a methods section? How is that author organizing their evidence and analysis? Each journal, there are quite clear patterns to this, even though each author may have their own unique approaches. There are conventions that each journal pushes their author towards. And the more you can do to make your work resemble those conventions, the better shot you have at having your paper be accepted for review. So you'll want to revise and kind of polish accordingly. And journals are interested in helping you out in this regard. Almost any journal will have a published set of instructions for contributors. Not just what font to use or what citation style they prefer, but also really the mandate of the journal, what kind of pieces they're looking for. So once you've done kind of the conceptual polishing, you'll also want to make sure that you followed instructions, the total word count, the citation style, the formatting. It's really worth your time to pay attention to that and get it all right. Then once it's beautiful and polished and ready to rumble, before you send that in for, to be considered by the journal, it is very much worth your time to get feedback on it from your advisor, from your instructors, or from your peers in the field, because they will help you identify, what's really clear, or what needs more work. Maybe elements that are a bit repetitive, or things that are tangential, or if the article is doing what you want it to do yet. Because the better shape you can get it in and the more clear and compelling it is as a paper, again, the better chance you'll have of having it make it through that next step of editorial review. So this is all to say that by the time you're ready to actually upload your article for submission, it should not look or sound or smell like a term paper, or a thesis, right? By the time it's done, it needs to be an article, which is a different thing. Because I guarantee you editors can smell a term paper a mile away. So it needs a transformation. Okay, so at this point, you're ready to submit. You'll want to pick one journal to start with. Most journals will ask you if you have submitted this work elsewhere, or if it's under consideration elsewhere. And many journals will not move forward with work that's been submitted elsewhere because there's a chance that they won't end up publishing it if it's already out for review somewhere else. So pick one to start with and make sure you've really got all of those instructions carefully taken care of. both to avoid any delays. I mean, you don't want your paper to sit there for a month or two before being told, oh, the citation style is wrong, please revise and resubmit, right? And you also really don't want to annoy the people who are in charge of processing your work. It's best to stay in good favors and do all the work you can to make sure that you've got all the steps right. So what happens next? You've submitted your article. You should receive confirmation that your work has been received. Most journals these days use a editorial software that sends you some kind of confirmation email. Then that article is going to be reviewed internally by staff at the journal. And within 1 to 2 months, generally, you should receive notice if they have selected your piece to go out for review, or if they've declined your piece at that point. So if their piece has been declined, you can submit it somewhere else at that point. If it has been sent out for review, you've got some waiting to do because review can take a bit of time. The reason reviews take so long sometimes, not always, is that this is essentially volunteer labor on the part of the wider academic community. You all know that your professors are very busy, and so when they receive a request to review a paper, they may accept, but it may not be on the top of their to-do list. So your paper is sent out for review. This may be anywhere from 1 to 2 to 3 different reviewers. And especially if the editor is going to then read those reviews before they return them to you, this wait time can take anywhere from 2 to 6 to 8 months. Matt, was that your experience more or less, like reviewer time?
In my experience, it depends greatly on the journal. Some journals are well run and have good managing editors who can encourage peer reviewers to get their work done quickly, and know who is a reliable peer reviewer who will do the work well and expeditiously. Other journals are maybe excellent journals, but they are notoriously slow for one reason or another. And that's a good thing to talk to your advisors and mentors about, because that news generally gets around through academic whisper networks. So it's good to know if you're in for a long wait.
Very much so. And it is appropriate, if it's been a while, it's entirely appropriate to send a polite note to check in, to ask, just wondering what the status of my article, would appreciate any updates you can provide. Because it is unfair to have someone sit on your work for a year if you're trying to get it published. So eventually you'll receive feedback from reviewers with suggestions on what works well, what needs improvement, whether or not they recommend this piece for publication in the journal. And the editor will usually provide some feedback of their own. If there's a particular thing that reviewers have identified that they feel strongly about, they may emphasize that. And they'll categorize the request for revisions in terms of minimal revisions, moderate revisions, or major revisions, depending on how much work reviewers and editors think the piece needs. So then the piece is back in your hands, and the timeline is up to you, how much time you spend revising before you resubmit. At that point, you don't want to wait too long. So you would, certainly take the time to do revisions well, but don't let too much time go by before you resubmit, because you want to keep things moving. You'll also want to compose a letter to the editor or to the reviewers, outlining the revisions that you've made, how you've addressed each of their comments, because that will be very helpful for them in rereading your piece and seeing all the work you've done to make it stronger. So at that point, your piece may be accepted as is, or it might go out for a second round of review. Some journals like to send revised pieces back to the original reviewers to say, hey, is this okay now? Is this up to snuff? So again, varying wait times there. If your piece is eventually accepted, then you'll be working with some journals use in-house copy editors or bought copy editors to ask for any final polishes. And then when your piece is accepted for publication, it may appear online shortly thereafter, or it may go into a queue to be slated for a future issue. And again, this can take another 6 months or more, depending on how much of a backlog that journal has to publish or the total volume of work they publish. So this is all to say that if you go down the academic publishing route, it is very reasonable to anticipate many months or even more than a year between your original submission and when that piece might come out in print. So if you go this route, it's important, I think, to compose your work knowing that it's going to be ancient history by the time it actually comes out. And you know what, so is everyone else's, right? I mean, there's everyone else has gone down that road too. But you can plan accordingly and maybe not frame it in a this is happening right now context, but think about the longer life of this piece, how it will be read in a year or 5 years. Because once it's in print, people may be reading it for quite some time. So some scholarly journals also are interested in publishing things more quickly. And so in consulting with your advisor and the librarians, and in your own exploration of journals, keep an eye out for those that include, you know, like online only options or kind of hot topic, almost op-ed features, because that's a much better way to fast track the submission process or to submit shorter pieces or really time sensitive phenomena. And it could be a good home for your work as well. So my goal here is not to discourage anyone from publishing in academic journals. I know I've given it kind of a bad rap, but they're all good reasons to think about publishing outside of the academic context as well. I mean, I think the beauty of publishing in a scholarly journal is that ideally you'll receive feedback from experts in the field that can really strengthen your work. And you are very much entering into a conversation with other thinkers and scholars, right? And there's a beauty to that. And depending on your ambitions after completing the program, it also may be very much in your interest to have a scholarly publication included in your CV. However, there's also great reasons to think about publishing outside of the ivory tower. I'm a big fan of public scholarship myself, and it opens up different opportunities and avenues for thinking about how you can turn the work you've done as a student into something that goes out into the world. So in my program, on Global Thought, we've had several students publish their work successfully on various media outlets, including The Diplomat and Al Jazeera. And so platforms that include essays, the long reads, op-eds, think pieces, right? These could all be great potential homes for your work, especially if you are up for revamping the scholarship you've done so that those main insights are really clear and that it is accessible to more of the general reader. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Matt, who will talk more about publishing outside of the scholarly journal world.
Okay, thank you, Rebecca. Thank you, Rachel, for having me here, and welcome everyone. Good morning. Thanks for coming. So I'll briefly just talk about my credentials for speaking here. So I spent 8 years as an associate editor at a journal called Contemporary Literature, which sort of fashions itself as the academic journal of record for scholars and students of Anglophone writing from World War II through to the present, so late 20th and 21st century. So in that capacity, I would generally do peer review, either of a detailed kind or of the sort of editorial stage, where we're deciding whether or not to send a piece out for review, for something of around 80 articles a year. And I did that for about 8 years. I also, while I was the associate editor of CL, worked with one of the other editors to establish a new review section which did non-peer-reviewed essays on issues relating to contemporary literature and culture. And this was an attempt to try and find a more general audience for the journal and to sort of try and develop forms of writing by scholars, by academics, many of them professors and graduate students, but which were targeted towards a more general readership and which didn't go through the ordinary process of peer review, so could be published more expeditiously, could get into print and onto the website more quickly. I've also, over the last several years, moved into an editorial role in book publishing, which obviously that's not something we're going to talk about at length today, but I'm the co-editor right now of a book series from Columbia University Press called Literature Now, which is likewise focused on late 20th and 21st century literature and culture. In addition to my academic editorial work and my own academic writing, I've published essays and reviews in a number of popular, or as I like to think of them, para-academic venues. So most recently, I published a review of the last part of Hilary Mantel's Wolf Hall trilogy in the journal Public Books, which is actually edited and produced out of Columbia and NYU. So it's a sort of local production. There are many Columbia faculty and graduate students who are involved with Public Books, either as writers or on the editorial and production side. Many of the questions that Rebecca posed about publishing in scholarly journals are germane also to publishing elsewhere, publishing in the broader world as a person who has some scholarly expertise and experience. So one of the questions which I would foreground right away, which Rebecca began with, is why do I want to publish my work? You've got to think of what your motivation is to get the work out there in the first place. And the same answers that Rebecca, and even when you're thinking about publishing outside of scholarly peer-reviewed journals. So you might want to publish your work to share your ideas with an audience to whom it matters. You might want to enter into dialogue with others who share your interest and share your expertise on the given subject. You might want to be staking a claim to a particular idea or argument, planting a flag, saying this argument, this method, this topic, it's mine, right? If you want to engage in dialogue around this, then you've got to go through me, or at least you need to consider my position. And then finally, and this isn't trivial, right? You might want to burnish your own professional credentials. Publishing your work, whether in a scholarly or a non-scholarly venue, is advantageous if you want to get into PhD programs, or if once you're in a PhD program, you want to apply for professorships or postdocs or grants or fellowships of one kind or another. So it's not a trivial aspect of this, right? It's not simply that we think about publishing in a self-interested fashion, but it would be disingenuous of us if we were to deny that publishing is not linked to ambition for our own careers and our own professional development. But when we're talking about popular or para-academic publishing, all of those four answers that Rebecca provided for why we might publish, three of them aren't quite as persuasive when it comes to popular publishing. So if you're looking to influence academic debates, then publishing in a popular venue will generally be less valuable if you are trying to enter into a dialogue among experts. Those experts may not be looking at a popular venue for people to whom to enter into conversation with. The authority of any claim to knowledge you're making in an essay won't be buttressed by peer review. When you go to a scholarly journal as a reader, you have some added confidence knowing that the arguments presented there have gone through a process of peer review. They've been fact-checked, they've been evaluated for methodological soundness. People who know the literature on the subject have made a judgment about whether this article has a proper relationship to the existing scholarly literature, whether its claims are sufficiently original to merit publication. And finally, non-peer-reviewed publications won't burnish your academic CV in the same way, right? If you're applying for a postdoc, for instance, several years from now, a line on your CV that is in one of the journals, peer-reviewed journals of record for your field, is simply going to count for more than a blog post or an op-ed or a non-peer-reviewed essay of some kind. Now, that doesn't mean that publishing in these contexts doesn't have value. It's just that the value is different. And primarily the value is that you're going to reach generally a bigger, a broader, and a differently motivated public, right? The audience is going to generally be larger, and the audience is going to be different in important ways that you have to consider as you're selecting the possible venue for your work, as you're writing or revising the piece that you're going to submit, and in terms of the afterlife of the article, who it's going to put you in dialogue, the kind of responses that the piece is going to generate. All of these are different, and all of those differences need to be seriously considered. So to sum up my beginning notes then, the question of audience here is, I think, the key one when it comes to thinking about publishing work that draws on your academic expertise, but is not targeted to a specifically academic peer-reviewed audience. So who are you trying to reach? That's the question you have to ask. Why is a popular or para-academic venue the right medium for what you want to say? And then finally, what is the right genre of writing to submit, to pitch, to write in order to reach that audience in the right way, right? Because when we start thinking about popular academic writing, we're not simply thinking about the academic article as a genre. There's a whole different range of kinds of writing that become available to you. Now, let me backtrack 1 second. Rebecca and I have both been talking about the academic article as if it's clear exactly what that is. And of course, it's not, right? What is the difference between an article and an essay? What does an article look like in one venue or another? So I'm going to drop in the chat now a very well-known and justly celebrated handbook on writing journal articles. It's by Wendy Belcher. It's called Writing Your Journal Article in 12 Weeks. It's in its 2nd or its 3rd edition now from University of Chicago Press. And if you're looking for hands-on advice about how to turn that term paper into an article and about what the difference is between them, then I heartily recommend Belcher's book. It's also written with an audience of people in multiple disciplines in mind. So it's not the kind of thing that's only going to be useful to you if you're like me, a literary scholar, or if you're a historian or an anthropologist or whatever it might be. It's written with a general academic readership in mind. Those of you who are like me, however, humanists, I'm going to drop another link into the chat. And this is a book by Eric Hyo, who's a professor of comparative literature, and it's called The Elements of Academic Style. He's punning on that very famous book by Strunk and White, The Elements of Style, which many of you may have encountered in high school or college. And this is a book explicitly written for humanists, not only for literary scholars. It would be relevant to many people in different humanities disciplines. And it's not just focused on the article. He talks about the difference between articles and book chapters, between articles and conference papers, and so on. So it's a more general guide to academic writing. Some of what Hyo says, I think, is also going to be valuable for writing for popular genres, but he's still primarily thinking about the major academic disciplines and the major academic genres: conference papers, research papers, dissertation chapters, theses, articles, book chapters, and so on. All right. Back to advice about popular publishing, having given you that little discourse and some links on academic stuff. So what kind of essay, what kind of piece would you write for a popular audience? So roughly, I think we can divide this kind of writing into 4 categories. And I say roughly here because there's tons of overlap between these categories. And the categories that I've isolated here are ones which are much more properly thought of as para-academic than strictly popular. And what I mean by that is that you'd still be writing from your position as a scholar, as a person who has expertise and knowledge to bear that's been developed in an academic institution and that draws on your authority as a scholar of the field and the discipline in which you are based. So here I'm thinking about scholarship outwards rather than just popular journalism or popular essay writing of a different kind, right? That's not something I'm especially qualified to teach, and it's not something we can reasonably cover in a workshop of this length. It's just too big of an area. So with the para-academic genres, these are the four that I think you might want to think about. So first, reviews, book reviews, or reviews of other cultural texts of one kind or another, depending upon your discipline. So reviews, they're the most common form of non-peer-reviewed publication, and they're often included in the pages or the websites of scholarly journals. So this is a form of non-article writing, which is often very accessible for people at an early stage of their career. It's a good entree to publishing in academic venues, and often the bar to publication is quite low, right? Book reviews editors are often scrambling for people to write these reviews. They're generally short, often only a few hundred words or up to 1,000 words in length. They generally summarize and evaluate new books of significance in a given field. And so often what you're looking for, if there's a book you're interested in, you want to think about, where are the readers of this book going to be reading in journals? Or what kinds of journals is the author of the book you want to review citing? Right? So if you see in that book that you're interested in that they repeatedly are referring to a journal like, say, the American Historical Review, then AHR might be a good place to go and pitch a review of that book. Sometimes there are opportunities to combine several books into a longer review essay that surveys broader developments in a field or discipline. But often, if it's your first attempt at writing and pitching a book review, stick to one significant book. And again, Rebecca's advice about following house style, following the journal guidelines about what the review looks like is essential here. Most journals will have a very definite set of instructions about what their review should look like. And it's crucial that you follow those instructions. One final piece of advice about reviews is avoid an overly combative style or stance, right? Everyone loves to read reviews that tear down and tear apart and absolutely trash and destroy the book that's under review, but that's a bad look for an early career person. People hold grudges, especially senior professors whose book you've torn down. These might be people you need to rely on later on in your career as peer reviewers of your own work, or as people who are evaluating fellowship and grant applications. Begin by thinking about how you can make a positive and affirmative contribution to a field, and save your polemics for either when you're a little bit more established or when you think it's absolutely morally, ethically, politically, intellectually necessary. But don't make the slash and burn review your default position, especially at this stage of your career. Beyond scholarly journals, you can look for reviewing opportunities in venues such as public books, which I mentioned earlier, or the Los Angeles Review of Books. These are public-facing para-academic websites and journals which value scholarly expertise, even as they're promoting a more publicly accessible writing style and seeking to find readers who are beyond the academy. Second category would be op-eds or think pieces. So these are short opinion-based essays that link scholarly interest to topical events or debates. We might associate these most commonly with newspapers, with the opinion sections of papers such as the New York Times or the Guardian in the UK, with websites and magazines that are focused upon questions of politics and policy, but also more broadly with general interest magazines and websites, of which there's a terrific array of them online available now. Some scholarly associations and journals also will publish op-eds and think pieces. Again, this is where you should talk to librarians and experts in your own discipline. And then lastly, there's a range of journals such as, for instance, the Chronicle of Higher Education or the Times Higher Education Supplement that regularly publish opinion and op-eds and think pieces on matters of general interest to people engaged with higher education. The third category would be personal essays or human interest essays. These will be generally short essays that link scholarly debates to human stories, perhaps something that happened to you or a member of your family, perhaps a story that's relevant to a particular community that you have studied or have knowledge about. In general, the idea is to bring human interest stories to light in such a way as they help highlight a policy debate, a new academic or research method, or a new research finding. This is often the case. You'll see this kind of work in the social sciences, for instance, right? Where linking what might otherwise seem like abstract theoretical or policy debates to real people and their experiences can really motivate, help you make an argument for why your research matters, right? Because you see the human or the environmental or the social costs or consequences of the work that you're doing. And then lastly, the area that I perhaps know least about would be the new medium that are developing around, for instance, newsletters, and the shift of what once was something we would call blogging onto sort of channel-driven websites like medium.com. So this is rapidly exploding area of publication that many academics are involved in. For instance, if you were to look at Heather Cox Richardson's Letters from an American, this is a widely popular newsletter. It goes out to hundreds of thousands of people. She's an academic historian, and she writes about the relationship between American history and American politics. She developed a huge readership for this during the Trump administration. The difficulty with this kind of writing is it's difficult to get into if you don't have already established a reputation as a person to listen to in the subject area. So, you know, Heather Cox Richardson was already well known as an historian before the Substack newsletter, which she circulates, came out. So how and whether this is an area you could get into as a person at an early stage of their academic career, that's a live question that I don't pretend to have an answer to. Okay, last couple of things I'll say. Preparation. Much of what Rebecca said is absolutely relevant to publishing in non-peer-reviewed journals. So knowing your venue, reading widely in that journal before you submit, paying attention to any instructions they give to authors, talking to editors over email or in person about whether or not the kind of piece you have in mind is suitable for that venue. Style is much more important, if anything, with popular and para-academic writing than with scholarly journal writing. As you all know from reading articles, a lot of very bad prose gets published in academic journals. That's much less the case when you're thinking about a public audience. So no jargon generally. Informal citation style or perhaps no citation style, no literature review. No one wants to read a great big summary of everything that anyone has ever said before on the subject that you're writing about. You have to carry the burden of expertise and authority rather than just simply showing people that you've done your homework. You can't assume when writing for a popular venue that your reader already knows about your topic or that your reader already considers your topic important. You have to tell them what it is that you're writing about, and you have to tell them about why it matters. You have to do it briefly. Concision is crucially important. No popular or para-academic venue is generally going to give you 5,000 to 9,000 words. That's about the length of journal articles, depending upon the venue, to make your case. You're often going to have 500, 1,000, 1,500 words maximum. So being able to write briefly, concisely, to the point is really crucial. The quality of the writing is going to matter. The aesthetics of the writing are going to matter much more with this kind of writing. So if you know that's something you have to work on, be prepared to revise, revise, revise. Give your work to people to read. Read your work out loud. And then finally, prepare to be edited. Often editing at the level of style is incredibly minimal with academic venues. No one has time for it, right? Everyone's volunteering their labor and there aren't enough hours in the day to fix someone else's, dangling modifiers. But with popular genres and popular venues, you'll nearly always be working with an editor who cares deeply about language and about prose style. So in my experience, I've never been edited more actively and more harshly than when writing for a public-facing venue, as opposed to writing for an academic-facing venue. So the last things I'm going to say, The rules around submission are similar as the ones that Rebecca said. Pick one place, as with peer-reviewed venues, generally multiple submissions. Submitting the same piece to multiple venues at once is frowned upon. Editors want to know that if they're putting work into editing and considering your piece, you're not going to take it elsewhere. Pitching your piece, generally before submitting a review or an essay, rather than just submitting the whole piece like you would with an academic journal, you should pitch your piece to the relevant editor. So search the website, see if there is an editor who is the commissioning editor or the reviews editor or the editor of the likely section for your piece, and then write them an email, describe the piece, ask them whether this is something that they'd be interested in publishing. Say something about your qualifications for writing it. Does it draw on your research? Is it linked to other things you've written and published elsewhere? Can you show them evidence of other pieces that you've published so that they can get confidence that you're going to deliver a piece that is readable on schedule? If you've not already written the piece, tell them when you'll be able to deliver it, what your time frame is for researching and writing the piece. And then finally, Rebecca had the useful slide on next steps about the timeline and what you would expect. I have nothing to say about that because it's a free-for-all. There are no general rules. Different journals and different websites have very different expectations about what the timeline of the review process would be, how many people would read your piece before it went to publication or was approved, how long the wait would be between approval and publication. Sometimes with public-facing venues, it's an incredibly rapid process. It could be a matter of weeks between initial pitch and the piece coming out. But sometimes it's slower and there's more time, but there's just too much variability really to generalize about. And then the very last thing I'm going to say, and this is relevant to academic publishing as well as popular, is if you get a piece rejected, don't take it too personally. Don't sit on it and be wounded. There are thousands of pieces out there being pitched, many of them that are great and that get accepted for publication in wonderful venues have been rejected by many editors before they get there. It's a natural and inevitable part of being out there as a writer is you're going to get rejections. My rule of thumb is if I believe in an article or an essay that I've written and it gets rejected, I already know where it's going next before I receive that rejection. I have that numbered list Rebecca referred to of the places where I want to put, where I think it would fit. And if number one says no, then the day I get that rejection, it's out to number two. Now, the only distinct thing I would say is if you know that if you get feedback with that rejection, with ways you can make the piece better, then absolutely take advantage of that feedback. Don't be stubborn and just send it out as if it were perfect and couldn't be improved upon. But do that expeditiously. Give yourself a week to get over your feelings being hurt, then give yourself another week to do the revisions and then send it out, right? But keep it out there. The more that the piece is circulating, the better it will get as it gets review and feedback, and the better chance you have of publishing it before you turn 50 years old. All right, that's all I have to say. Thank you.
I would absolutely second Matt's words about, pieces being rejected.